Let's get into it. Number 10. Unimaginable heat. The initial geological models predicted a manageable and steady rise in temperature as the massive Soviet drilling rig chewed its way downward. Scientists expected a temperature of roughly 100 degrees Celsius at the 10,000-meter mark. They were completely wrong. At 12,262 meters deep, the Earth suddenly stopped behaving like solid and predictable ground. It started acting like a pressurized and inescapable oven. Engineers anticipated extreme heat, but they were entirely unprepared for solid rock that behaved like melting plastic. As the subterranean temperatures surged past their models and approached 180 degrees Celsius, the massive layers of ancient granite stopped fracturing cleanly. Instead, the rock began to smear and warp in real time under the immense pressure. It suffocated the spinning drill bit in a thick and viscous embrace. Progress did not just slow down, it violently seized. Drill pipes made of the strongest steel alloys twisted like warm taffy, eventually snapping under the unbelievable rotational strain. You have to understand the sheer scale of the mechanics involved. We are talking about a drill string weighing over 200 tons, suspended by massive derricks on the frozen surface. The torque applied by the rotary table at the top took several full rotations just to travel down the 12 kilometers of pipe to reach the cutting bit. The sensors bolted to the drill string relayed thermal data that forced the world's leading geologists to throw out decades of established temperature maps. The sheer and catastrophic mechanical failure taught a humbling lesson to everyone involved. Piercing the deep crust is never a simple matter of brute force. The further we push into the abyss, the harder the thermodynamic reality of the planet pushes back. Desperate to maintain their momentum and secure their political funding, the rig crews threw every engineering trick in the book at the borehole. They engineered bizarre and experimental chemical drilling fluids designed to cool the cutting face. They aggressively swapped out heavy industrial bits, risking the lives of the rig workers in the freezing Arctic cold. They agonized over microscopic changes to rotation speeds to buy just a few more feet of depth. Absolutely none of it mattered. The crushed and warped cores pulled from the ultimate depths proved that our surface-level mathematical models were dangerously naive. Minerals warp and flow under apocalyptic stress in ways we never predicted. If anyone watching has worked in deep well drilling or heavy industry, you know exactly what happens to steel under sheer and unyielding rotational stress. Now, try to imagine managing that exact same physical stress on a drill string that is over 12 kilometers long. Suspended in a hole no wider than a dinner plate, it defies all common sense and pushes the absolute limits of material science. Number 9. Boiling hydrogen. When the thick and heavy drilling slurry returned to the icy surface of the rig in Murmansk, it began to foam and hiss wildly. The visual contrast was completely jarring. The ambient air temperature outside the rig enclosure was often 40 degrees below zero, yet the mud returning from the deep was boiling hot. It looked exactly as if an invisible fire boiled it from below. Men standing on the freezing metal platforms watched the mud froth with extreme unease. They felt the hair on their arms rise in the bitter cold air. The vapor bleeding out of the crushed rock was not steam. It was massive quantities of pure and highly combustible hydrogen gas. Under the apocalyptic heat and pressure of the deep crust, the rocks were literally cracking apart at the molecular level. They were breaking atomic bonds and violently expelling water and gas from within their dense mineral structures. This relentless off-gassing wreaked absolute havoc on the surface hardware. Sudden hydrogen kicks altered downhole pressures in the blink of an eye. This caused massive and expensive industrial mud pumps to violently cavitate, violently shake, and completely fail. The rig floor became a highly dangerous environment where a single spark could ignite the venting gas. Yet, while the rig crews frantically battled these sudden pressure surges that threatened catastrophic blowouts, the observing biologists and chemists stared at the bubbling slurry in sheer disbelief. This was not just a terrifying mechanical hazard for the engineers. Hydrogen is pure and raw biological fuel. The realization that chemical reactions deep in the dark could split water through a process called radiolysis changed everything we knew about the origins of biology. It meant that ancient and subterranean life could theoretically survive completely cut off from the sun and the surface world. The deep earth was not a dead and sterile zone of crushed rock. It was an active and seething chemical factory capable of sustaining primitive life in the absolute dark. It forces a complete paradigm shift in how we view the habitability of our own planet. It makes you wonder how much biological life is currently hiding miles beneath our feet, completely isolated from the surface world, feeding on the slow decay of radioactive isotopes and the release of deep gas. It proves that life does not need a warm sun or photosynthesis to thrive. It only needs chemistry, extreme pressure, and time. This revelation forces us to completely rethink the habitable zones of our entire universe. Number 8. Microscopic fossils. Under the intense and sterile glare of a laboratory electron microscope, a thin slice of core from the Kola shaft transformed from dull gray rock into a staggering museum of the ancient world. Researchers identified distinct structural outlines and intricate mineralized films hidden inside the solid stone. These microscopic shapes perfectly matched the biological structure of marine plankton. These were not living and breathing cells. They were the fossilized biological fingerprints of single-celled life, perfectly preserved in rock that was laid down over 2 billion years ago. The absolute shock was not just finding fossils. It was the impossible depth at which they were found. At over 6 kilometers down, the rock had been aggressively cooked, heavily crushed, and plastically deformed by the unimaginable weight of the world above it. Geologists believed that any organic material would have been utterly obliterated by the intense metamorphic process. Yet, tiny and microscopic mineral voids had acted like an impenetrable vault. They successfully locked away organic traces for eons, protecting the delicate carbon structures from the hellish heat and tectonic shearing. It forced the entire field of geology into a profound and immediate reckoning. If fragile organic outlines can survive the crushing forge of the deep crust, it radically expands our understanding of where biosignatures can hide in the geologic record. This discovery reaches far beyond our own planet. It directly informs how astrobiologists search for life on other worlds. It forces us to ask a massive and philosophical question. Do you believe this proves that life on other planets, like the arid deserts of Mars, or beneath the icy crusts of Jupiter's moons, is likely hiding deep underground right now? The evidence from the Kola borehole suggests that solid geology can protect fragile biology through the most extreme and violent conditions imaginable in the universe. It means the fossil record of our solar system might not be on the surface at all. It might be buried miles deep in the bedrock, waiting for a drill to find it. The preservation of these microfossils also completely shattered the accepted timeline of biological survival. It forced researchers to accept that the deep Earth acts as an immense and highly pressurized time capsule. The exact same geological mechanisms that crush rock can simultaneously create microscopic safe havens. It is a terrifying and beautiful contradiction of nature. Number 7. Free water. Textbooks had long dictated that the deep continental crust was a sealed and bone-dry vault. The prevailing theory was that surface water could only penetrate a few kilometers down before the immense pressure of the overlying rock squeezed all the pores and fractures completely shut. The Kola cores shattered that assumption forever, forcing university professors to rewrite their curriculums overnight. As segments of deep granite were hauled to the freezing surface, they actively glistened in the harsh industrial light. They bled a slow and ancient spring directly out of the solid rock. The intense pressure and subterranean heat were driving brutal chemical reactions at a massive scale deep underground. This thermodynamic engine squeezed bound water directly out of the crystal lattice of the minerals and forced it to migrate along microscopic fault lines. This was not fresh rain filtering down from the surface. This was ancient and primordial fluid. It was trapped and compressed during the formation of the planet until it flowed like blood through stone. The sudden influx of liquid swelled the drilling mud and the clay deep in the hole, choking the mechanical pumps and causing severe blockages. It turned a theoretical drilling exercise into a chaotic and daily fight against deep earth hydraulics. But scientifically, this moving water was an absolute revelation. It acted as a highly pressurized subterranean highway. It transported dissolved gases, extreme heat, and heavy metals across vast distances underground. It proved that the deep crust behaves much more like a leaky and pressurized sponge than a solid and impenetrable wall. The existence of this fluid at such extreme depths alters our understanding of the global water cycle. If the deep crust of the Earth is actually filled with ancient and moving water, you wonder just how much of our planet's total water volume is actually hidden beneath our feet. There could be massive and diffuse reservoirs locked in the dark, potentially holding more water than all the oceans we see on the surface combined. This deep crustal water acts as a high-pressure lubricant for tectonic plates, potentially influencing earthquakes and continental drift in ways we are only just beginning to accurately model. It proves that the Earth is not a dead rock wrapped in a wet shell, but a thoroughly saturated and dynamic system all the way down. The sheer volume of fluid trapped in the deep crust forces us to completely reimagine the geological plumbing of our entire world. Number 6. Granite that would not end. Based on decades of surface-level seismic surveys, geologists were absolutely certain they would hit a distinct and dramatic geological boundary. By bouncing acoustic waves deep into the Earth and measuring how they reflected back, they had mapped the subterranean world. They expected the lighter and less dense granite of the upper crust to transition abruptly into dense and heavy basalt. In geophysics, this theoretical transition zone is known as the Conrad discontinuity. It was accepted as absolute and unquestionable scientific fact and taught in every geology class on the planet. When the massive drill finally pierced that specific target depth of around 7 kilometers, The scientists waited eagerly for the core samples to confirm their models. But the cores brought up the exact same granite. It was just harder, more fractured, and severely altered by extreme heat. The seismic waves had lied to them. The reality was a magnificent illusion born of extreme physics. The immense heat and pressure had not changed the rock type at all. Instead, it had rearranged the internal metamorphic fabric of the granite itself. The crystalline structure warped and compressed under the immense weight of the world, fundamentally changing its acoustic properties. This altered how acoustic waves bounced through the rock, creating a phantom layer on the seismic radar that did not physically exist. It was a profoundly humbling moment for the global scientific community. It proved that models built from remote echoes are dangerously misleading when dealing with the extreme environments of the deep earth. There is absolutely no substitute for the visual reality of putting your bare hands on the physical rock. It showed that the earth is far more complex, highly dynamic, and deceptive than our best supercomputers and acoustic models could ever predict. It forced scientists to reevaluate seismic data from all over the globe, casting doubt on the assumed structure of the continental plates. It serves as a stark and permanent reminder that nature does not care about our mathematical models or our textbook theories. It plays by its own terrifying and unpredictable rules. The realization that metamorphic changes in rock could perfectly mimic a structural boundary forced a massive audit of geophysical maps worldwide. It meant that many of our deep Earth models were based on acoustic illusions. The Kola borehole proved that until you physically bring the core to the surface, you are only ever guessing at the truth. Number 5. Catastrophic equipment failure. There came a point where the Kola borehole stopped yielding geological secrets and began actively consuming heavy, industrial equipment. The sheer physical hostility of the environment overwhelmed the absolute best technology the Soviet Union could engineer. Massive sections of steel drill strings simply twisted, sheared away, and hung lost in the pitch-black abyss. High-grade industrial bits, studded with tungsten carbide and designed to chew through solid rock for years, melted into useless and blunt slag in a matter of hours. Bearings, complex seals, and highly calibrated sensors that were perfectly reliable at shallow depths spontaneously failed when subjected to the crushing pressure. The thermodynamic reality of the abyss literally broke their fundamental mechanics. The extreme heat ruined the temper of the steel, making it brittle and highly prone to shattering. Replacing lost or broken tools meant halting drilling operations for weeks at a time. It forced men to lower heavy and specialized retrieval gear in blistering Arctic winds, playing a blind game of operation 12 kilometers underground. Often, they would only lose the retrieval gear as well to a zone where the rock flowed rather than cracked. Those lost and mangled lengths of pipe remain down there today. They are ghost objects permanently entombed in the well, serving as a silent monument to human hubris. It was a brutal realization that you can design the perfect machine on paper, using the brightest engineering minds on the planet. You can calculate the tensile strength and the yield points flawlessly, but the sheer and violent force of the planet will always find a way to defeat it. To the heavy machinery operators and structural engineers watching this, try to visualize the rotational shear force required to snap a solid steel pipe 12 kilometers long. The sheer physics of that failure are staggering to comprehend. It represents millions of pounds of torque, releasing in a violent and subterranean whip, whip. It is a true testament to the insurmountable power of the Earth's crust, a place that absolutely refuses to be tamed by human hands. The logistical nightmare of dealing with these failures was staggering. Every time the drill string snapped, engineers had to meticulously calculate the exact depth of the break, lower specialized fishing tools, and attempt to latch onto a broken pipe thousands of meters away, all completely blind. It was a high-stakes and multi-million-dollar game played in the absolute dark, and the Earth won almost every single time. Number 4. The Screams recording. When the Kola Superdeep drilling project was eventually abandoned, the facility fell into deep ruin, and a rusted and heavy iron cap was bolted over the shaft at. The sudden industrial silence was quickly filled by something much darker and far more pervasive. A persistent global rumor emerged that a specialized and heat-resistant microphone, lowered into the extreme heat of the abyss to measure acoustic emissions, had captured the agonizing wails of millions of souls. This horrifying audio file leaked to the public and became famously known across the globe as the Well to Hell. It featured a chaotic and overlapping cacophony of desperate and screaming voices, set against a backdrop of deep and rumbling heat. Acoustics experts and professional sound engineers easily debunked the tapes as a complete fabrication and a clever hoax. It was likely a distorted and heavily manipulated movie soundtrack, mixed with the metallic groans of the failing rig machinery and ambient noise. Yet the legend took deep root in the cultural consciousness and refused to die. For the general public, the idea that humanity had arrogantly drilled so deep that we physically pierced the ceiling of the underworld felt entirely plausible. It resonated deeply with ancient mythologies and deep religious fears. Do you remember the first time you heard that infamous audio recording on the early internet? It tapped into a primal and ancient fear of the unknown dark beneath our feet. The genuine horror of the Kola Borehole, however, possessed no actual demons and absolutely no trapped souls. The true terror was the stark and crushing reality of extreme physics. It was the haunting realization of how utterly hostile the deep Earth is to any human intrusion. The Earth does not want us down there. It used every physical force available, from extreme heat to crushing pressure to aggressive chemical off-gassing, to push us back to the surface. The real screams were not from the damned, but from the tortured steel of the drill string failing against the unbeatable power of the planet. But the psychological impact of working in that isolated and freezing outpost, constantly fighting a losing battle against the deep Earth, cannot be understated. The rig workers were pushing the very limits of human endurance, listening to the groaning and screeching of the massive steel pipes day and night. It is no wonder that in that harsh and unforgiving environment, the terrifying myth of the Well to Hell was born. It was a manifestation of their own exhaustion and the overwhelming scale of what they were attempting to achieve. Number 3. Unexpected minerals. Researchers expected the absolute deepest sections of the Kola hole to yield barren, highly uniform and entirely predictable granite. They expected a dead and boring stone completely devoid of economic value. Instead, they pulled up rocks layered with dazzling and highly concentrated mineral veins. They looked almost deliberately placed by an intelligent hand, glittering with intense metallic signatures. The deep and circulating ancient water we discussed earlier had reached a supercritical state at these extreme depths. It was behaving as both a liquid and a gas simultaneously, totally defying basic surface physics. This supercritical fluid acted as an insanely aggressive chemical solvent. It dissolved microscopic trace metals out of the vast volume of surrounding bedrock and redeposited them in highly concentrated and narrow fractures. As the fluid moved and cooled slightly, striking deposits of copper, pure nickel, useful, and even pure gold were discovered at depths where traditional economic geology declared they simply could not exist in such extreme concentrations. This deep and highly pressurized chemistry factory was visually mesmerizing, proving that the deep earth is incredibly dynamic. However, it carried a fatal and practical warning for anyone dreaming of deep earth resource extraction. Disturbing these pressurized mineral traps with modern and large-scale mining equipment would trigger catastrophic blowouts. Opening a void at that depth would cause the supercritical fluids to flash boil and expand with the force of a massive bomb. It would instantly vaporize heavy machinery and violently kill anyone operating it. It made deep earth extraction permanently and physically impossible. When the core samples containing these unique minerals were brought to the surface, the sudden release of pressure often caused the rock itself to violently shatter and explode on the examination tables. The rock was so highly stressed that it could not survive the transition to normal atmospheric pressure without fracturing into pieces. The Earth had concentrated immense and unimaginable wealth over billions of years, but locked it behind a wall of impenetrable physics and lethal thermodynamic pressure. It is the ultimate and cruel irony of nature. The greatest untouched gold mine in the world, holding unimaginable riches and critical industrial metals, is forever out of our physical reach, completely protected by the planet's own extreme defense mechanisms. Number 2. The density paradox. Standard geological physics dictate a simple, highly logical, and linear rule. The deeper you go into the crust, the more the immense and compounding weight of the world above compresses the rock into a solid and ultra-dense mass at 12 kilometers down, bearing the staggering weight of 4,000 atmospheres of pressure. The granite should have been completely impenetrable. It should have possessed the structural integrity of solid steel. It was the exact opposite. When the final drill cores finally emerged into the daylight, the geologists were completely baffled. The granite was shockingly porous. It was highly fractured, very brittle, and splintered from the inside out. The blistering heat had forced-bound water out of the crystalline structures of the minerals. Because the water had absolutely nowhere to expand in the confined space, the resulting hydraulic pressure caused the rock to actively shatter under the immense strain. This shattered density became an absolute engineering nightmare for the drilling crews. Instead of resting the heavy drill bit against a solid and predictable structural wall, the rig crews found themselves drilling into a fragile and crushed sponge of broken rock. The walls of the borehole constantly threatened to collapse into themselves. A highly dangerous phenomenon known as hole slouging. It threatened to swallow the entire 12-kilometer drill string into the dark without a single sound, permanently trapping billions of rubles worth of equipment. This density paradox proved that extreme and multi-directional pressure does not always create a solid and impenetrable barrier. Sometimes the competing forces of heat fluid expansion, and lithostatic pressure destroy the rock completely from within. It creates a chaotic and highly unpredictable nightmare for anyone foolish enough to try and drill through it. It completely upended the engineering models used for deep Earth stability and showed that the deeper you push, the more unstable the ground beneath you actually becomes. The rig operators had to constantly inject specialized and heavy drilling muds just to hold the walls of the hole open, fighting a desperate balancing act against the crushing weight of the Earth. Every single meter gained in this highly fractured zone was a massive victory against physics itself. It proved that our understanding of deep crustal mechanics was fundamentally flawed, and that the Earth's interior is a far more shattered and dynamic environment than we ever imagined. Number 1. The Lunar Twin. Perhaps the most staggering intellectual shock of the entire project occurred when Soviet scientists placed the deepest Kola cores under the lens of an electron microscope and analyzed their chemical signatures. They compared the data from the deep Earth to something completely alien, and the results left them totally speechless. The precise mineral composition, the specific isotopic ratios, and the microscopic crystalline structure of the rock hauled up from 12 kilometers down were a near-perfect match for extraterrestrial material. Specifically, they matched the lunar soil returned by the uncrewed Soviet Luna 20 moon mission. Finding terrestrial rock completely indistinguishable from the surface of the moon sent profound shockwaves through the global scientific community. It was not a mere coincidence. It hinted at an incredibly violent and shared cosmic history between the Earth and the moon. It provided tangible and physical evidence supporting the giant impact hypothesis. The theory that a Mars-sized body slammed into the early Earth, ejecting the massive amount of material that would eventually coalesce into our moon. This shared history had been locked away in total darkness for billions of years, just waiting for human engineering to pull it to the surface. It proved, once and for all, that we do not need to look up to the stars to find the terrifying, the alien, and the truly unknown. The deepest and most crushed reaches of our own planet remain as profoundly alien, as intensely hostile, and as wildly uncharted as the cold vacuum of deep space. The critical answers to the violent formation of the solar system and the true origins of our planet are buried right beneath our feet. We have only scratched the absolute surface of the Earth's crust. If you were handed unlimited funding today and tasked with pushing the boundaries of human knowledge, where on Earth would you choose to sink the next super deep bore? Would you target an active fault line, a dormant supervolcano, or the deep ocean floor? Let us know your detailed thoughts in the comments. The terrifying mysteries beneath our feet have only just begun to be uncovered. The Kola Superdeep Borehole remains the deepest artificial point on our planet, a tiny and narrow 12-kilometer pinprick into a massive sphere that is over 12,000 kilometers wide. It stands as a permanent testament to our relentless drive to understand the cosmos, even when that cosmos is buried directly beneath us.